Anyway, so yeah, I was playing with ChatGPT this morning, trying to teach it electronics. I was trying to. I took an LT Spice. First, I got it to work out a circuit for me to power an LED from a 12-volt supply, and then I put that together in LT Spice and saved it, which saves to a text file. Um, in the appropriate format so the computer can read it and everything. But I then took that text file and gave it to ChatGPT and then said, here's an example of the save file of LT Spice. I'm not so sure if it was familiar with them from before. And it's like, can you change the resistor value so that the LED is running at 90% of its maximum current, so it's brighter? And then it kept changing the wrong thing. It's like trying to get there, and then it kept changing the target current, and then it was changing the resistance, and then it messed stuff up, and it's like, okay, still some way to go, but I think I could get you there with hours of no this way type things. But give it another 6 months or a few years of development, and it's like, put me together an LT Spice simulation of a circuit that does this.
Yeah, so it's that memory issue again,
Hmm.
isn't it?
And it,
They want it to learn, but they're not letting it remember what it learned every time, which is kind of silly.
I was thinking of a workaround for that, which within a conversation it seems to be inconsistent in its own things. So I told it to put together a list of fixed variables that are only changed if there's a good reason to change them. You don't just pick a new one every time you have a new comment. And I didn't get very far with that, but I think that might help. But when it gets a bit more developed, you could have a sort of save the current conversation state in a compressed data file expressed as text. I'll cut and paste that in my own computer and then give it to you in the next conversation.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where you're going with this, to be
Well,
honest.
if they don't let it keep data persistent between conversations, you can do it yourself. And
It seems a bit of a futile exercise. I mean, yeah, sure, you can do that to
hmm,
help you with working with it, but I don't know. I think that conversation was more like a high level. What's going on with the development of AI?
yeah, yeah, there's yeah, we did that one pretty well last time. Should we go
Yeah,
existential?
sure.
Or do you have some wild cards to throw?
I think I finished showing my wife the rest of the ancient apocalypse stuff with
Hmm.
Graham Hancock,
I've got it
and
downloaded.
she
I need
she
to
was
watch
rather
it.
terrified. Yeah, she was terrified by the end of it last night. She's like, "Can we watch something else, please? This is kind of freaking me out." Which yeah, if you know what's going on with that whole conversation, it should freak you out like that. I think her reaction of like, "I really want to not think about this right now anymore," is the sane reaction. Whereas I'm sitting there like, "Oh, this is fascinating. We're all gonna die."
Okay, so a
Right.
lot of the times we've talked about perceptions and concepts of stuff, and I've been like, yeah, I totally see how that view of it makes sense, but I hold a totally different one because of the wider metaphysical view. And it's like so many times I've just sort of left it alone and just like want to grab it. What do you think?
I feel like we both do that though, just from
Yeah?
different metaphysical points of view.
Yeah.
Like we've had a lot of those conversations. I'm trying to think about all the arguments that we've had over the time. It's funny, we've known each other a while and we've had some real intense conversations, but there hasn't actually been that many of them.
Hmm.
We've like seen each other every couple months for a
Yeah.
long time and then have a real interesting chat and then be like, all right, I'll see you 6 months from now.
Yeah. And you were saying we should do a
Yeah.
podcast.
I've been saying that for a while. Just because every time we came back together, we had an interesting conversation. Although at the time, there was a lot of big things to argue about in the world.
Yeah.
Like, the COVID stuff, that was a big deal at the time. There was a lot of that. metaphysics stuff. I don't remember all the shit that we talked about, to be honest.
Beware of
Can't
unearned
remember half of
wisdom.
it. Oh yeah, psychedelics, all of that.
Yeah.
Mm. Ah, yeah. Someone made the point about in order to be a politician, you must be required to undergo psychedelic trips. I thought that'd be a great idea. Someone said that, and I'm like, oh, there's a good way to filter out the psychopaths, or
Do
at least help
psychopaths?
them like
Does it?
temper their worst issues.
What does a drug trip do to psychopaths?
That's a good question, actually. But I just sort of mean, as far as I'm aware about it, I haven't had any experience. The people who are corrupt in soul and who have dark ambitions would
Hmm.
be confronted with that in a rather brutal way
Hmm.
during the trip. And I think that might be a good learning lesson for, you know, people who are seeking power for that kind of power over others reason.
Hmm.
Might be a cool idea. It might help expand, make politicians a little bit more open minded, trying to get other people on board.
Yeah. I'm not sure where I sit on. Oh, psychedelics are a really interesting one because they take you psychological places in the same way as getting going down um, some river rapids. Like so, you're taken on a trip, right? It's not going to a destination, and there are other systems of mental training that can take you the same places much slower, but you can walk there with in control of yourself every step. And if you're talking about breaking someone out of the habitual patterns of thinking and showing them more than they wanted to see of reality, then I think it's really powerful. But you're not going to become wise from it because you have to fully integrate that. You need to get it a step at a time, and it then becomes part of you, part of your personality, part of who you are and what you express in the world. You can't suddenly change who you are through a drug trip, but it can certainly remind you solidly.
Of course.
Rem-
And I'm not going to use this thing anymore. It's done that a couple times during setup.
it can
So I
remind you
just
that there's more
but
to life, and
I think the big
hmm,
thing that I know about it is that for almost everyone who does it, they become more of an open individual.
hmm,
Like they're more open to new ideas and to other people. Um, I think that at the very minimum would be a helpful thing for politicians. I'm sort of, I'm doing a bit, like I'm not
hmm.
serious about that, but something has to be done about the politicians either way. Like
Hmm.
that's not a we're not headed for a good place unless something is done there. You know, I think I keep saying it, like we need adults in the room. And we haven't had that for a long time.
Yeah.
At least not ones with best interest at heart.
When I try and think about solutions to that problem, I think of a lecture from uni in engineering, and it was like there's different types of problems. There's uh, physics problems where it's like we don't know how to even start solving this problem, or we don't understand it. There's engineering problems where it's like, right, we need to assemble all the bits we know how to use, like weld this there, connect that wire there, and so on to solve this problem. Then there's political problems. Engineers don't worry about political problems, and that was as far as it went. And I see that same pattern in my head of I approach it from an engineering perspective. Right, how do I solve this problem? It's people. No, just no. I don't know. I don't solve people.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but you can. Like that's the thing that needs to be solved. Like we're not going to. have a magically better world and society by inventing the new energy technology if it's just going to be, confiscated by the government and then used for war,
Mm.
while the, rich person doesn't have access to it and still has to pay through their nose for gas.
Yeah.
It's you know, if you want to fix problems in the world, it's the number one requirement. Um, and yeah, I know, clean your own house before you fix the world, all of that. But my point about that is actually just that that's how you fix the politicians and the larger problems. You get your own house in order and encourage others to do the same. And I can complain all day and night about how we have children in charge of our nations, but they're put there by the children who voted for them. We can't have a mature and responsible statesman unless you have a mature and responsible populace electing it.
Mm.
Just is not going to happen.
It's interesting describing mature humans as children, and it lines up very well with the idea of reincarnation in the sense of there's a lot to learn, and just because you have a fully developed human body doesn't mean you are a fully developed self, and that development occurs over many tries and failures, and if you are someone who has it well put together, that's probably because you've failed a whole bunch of times already, and some good humility comes from that. um, but by your definition of children in that, they also get a vote, so you've got to work out a system that works well with them. And that's there was a not sure if I was talking to you when I said it. I don't think so. Someone I saw a clip from one of Joe Rogan's podcasts. The guy had gone to Africa and he saw someone who looked really good physically and said, "Whoa, wow, you look like a supermodel. Do you want to come to America and I'll take your photos?" Why would I want to go to America? Isn't that where they jump off buildings because they're so unhappy? And a culture, our cultures in the West, the Western European based cultures, New Zealand, America, Canada, um, so on, are they're developing at such a rate, or the foundations of them are changing at such a rate that they never actually mature. By the time you get the hang of how to handle one thing, that's already 2 generations back of whatever's developing. And so things are changing too fast for us to get the hang of it. And hunter-gatherer cultures or tribal societies that have any society that's existed in the same place for a few generations has probably worked out a lot more of the bugs than we ever will at this rate of change. And there's no good answers there. Just an observation, I guess.
I think there is something there, something to that. But I would say that there's an inverse relationship there.
Hmm.
That if what you're saying is true, you would expect those who are the older generation, who have the wealth and control, to actually be successful. Well, I mean, they're successful in enriching themselves. I mean, to actually have a handle on what's going on. But as far as I can see, those who are most clued in and who have the greatest ideas for generation solution are the ones who have grown up with the technology, not the ones who have been around for the longest. I suppose you can make the same argument. We see what's happening in the world more because we have more experience with looking through the portals to that knowledge, whereas those running the countries do not have that experience.
And also those who grew up with certain problems around them tend to have found the solutions to the problems they grew up with. Not entirely, but they've generally come some distance toward the solutions to those problems. And so problems that crop up after they've matured and got through that developmental phase. So new problems that crop up when people are 30, unless they are very mentally active people, they probably won't be paying attention to those new problems and trying out new solutions in the same way. Most people sort of settle into it, oh, this is how I live, and then, oh, new things I need to get the hang of, oh, bugger, and so on.
Oh, is that why we're on the brinks of collapse in society? Because the age range for those who are in charge of our Western society grew up in the golden age,
When resource
and then
constraints weren't a problem.
like in the late 40s, during the 50s and early 60s, before all the catastrophes came about. Their growing up age was an age of plenty and no problems. And then they matured, going, everything's fine, I can do whatever I like, and there's no consequences. And then they just fucked the world for the rest of us.
And then the next generation after that, well, 70s, 80s, hippies
They're
and
not
kids
in
of
charge.
hippies.
Yeah, they're not in charge yet, but they're the ones making mess on the cultural institution and then like training the woke idiots.
Yeah, but then there's also
The,
there's definitely the too far there, but there's
the
also
pre-woke.
there's pre-woke and post-woke, I guess, and then the ones who just missed it entirely.
Yeah, countercultures.
Hmm. And
The Gen X is an interesting one because they're like sandwiched in between that, where they're just sort of, fuck, I don't want anything to do with you. And then it's the millennials who got indoctrinated with that shit, and a large portion of us as well. Although I think that more of us than the millennials rebelled and went the opposite way because we could, you know, early YouTube, we could look up some interesting shit before
where
the bans came down.
where do the dividing lines sit in the generations? I've never quite pinpointed it.
Um, it's such a blurry thing. This is something that I really annoyed about generations. I think they're twice as long as they should be.
Hmm.
I feel like generations, if you were to take, if you were to take, say Gen Z and millennials, and then right on the border of them, separate that out into a third generation, the in between one, and then gave that its own name and separated the three of them, then you'd have a more accurate picture, I reckon.
Hmm.
Besides, the other problem is technology and culture is changing so rapidly and so fast that the the what do you call it? The experience one has growing up is so much different year to year that it is more analogous to what it was generation to generation beforehand.
Hmm.
Like the dividing line between generations is just sort of a random arbitrary date, where it really should be, like you're saying, based upon when they grew up and what they experienced. Like the boomers and grew up during that heyday and that plenty, and that's defined them relatively clearly because they just take everything for themselves and screw everyone else over. The Gen Xers grew up in the shadow of the 60s and 70s, and they're really like, wow, I just want to check out of everything. This is too nuts, and be a bit bogan and grunge. And then the millennials grew up with the indoctrinations of the boomers who were going through that revolution, and that's pretty clear. But then it comes to us, and that's where it gets a bit foggy, I find, because like you and I, we had a childhood without the internet, and then an adolescence with it. And I don't think we're anything like the kids who had the internet into their childhood.
Hmm.
Now we've got the COVID scenario that's going to be fucking with, that's definitely a new generation. And
Yeah.
then you've got, pre and post. And I suppose that's also the same because of the timing works out. I was going to say pre and post economic crisis in 2008, but that was the same with us.
In Christchurch, we've got the earthquake generation.
What, the kids born after, before,
Before,
or
so they
just like
experienced kids who had the earthquake
right?
during their formative years.
Well, that'd be us, wouldn't it?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, I was a little. I grew up outside town a bit, and then homeschooled, so out of quite a few loops there. But
Like you.
yeah, it's it's definitely an effect there. Something that comes to mind. Science is about making hypotheses and testing them, not about saying this is what we expect to be true. Let's go prove it. And
Yeah.
in that spirit, there's some very interesting stuff I've seen which a lot of people will laugh and wave away and dismiss immediately. But it's okay, look at this, find some data and look at it and compare it and test the hypothesis before you wave it away. Um, there's interesting stuff people have written on astrology of generations, like which planet was in which sign at which time, and then it switched at this year, or maybe went back and forward because of the Earth's motion around the sun um, around these years. Then okay, we can see this personality trait set in this generation from that, and this personality trait set in this generation from that, and relatively subtle effect, but you can see the effect on the scale of a generation. And I saw someone looking at what was coming in the next few decades and saying, okay, well, before we had, for example, the locus of evil in the collective consciousness was uh, individual serial killers with these satanic tendencies. Then it went to domestic terrorists like lone gunmen. Then it went to um, the police and the authorities. Look at defund the police and all those movements. And then it's okay. Next in the chain would be the future and what we're going to do with it. And then you see that horror movie Megan, where that childlike robot starts killing everyone who threatens the human she's been told to keep safe. And threaten
Oh
includes
yeah.
tell her to do her chores. And it's like yeah, okay, well that seems to be arriving on schedule.
You sort of skipped over the demonization of no, you sort of didn't. I was going to say the demonization of like free thinkers, but then you would just call us terrorists. So
Hmm.
yeah, like they do with the all the teachers, not the teachers, all the parents who are trying to protect their kids from all the trans shit and being
Hmm.
labeled as domestic terrorists and threatened with jail time. Whoa, lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are. This is the thing that I think is amazing about our time is that we have access to this technology, and there's I think collectively everyone is realizing that we know nothing and we've been lied to about everything.
Hmm.
Like we were raised with this story about the world, and now we're just sort of looking at the internet going, oh, wow, that's all bullshit. What's going on?
Yeah.
And the,
That
establishment's still going like, no, it's still true. Trust us. And everyone's like,
that feeling
no.
that we've been lied to comes out in so many ways. Like, look at all the conspiracy theories that I think we would agree are off the deep end. Like, flat Earth, for example, is the classic one. Um, the idea that we can't trust what we've been told and we're being lied to. That feeling, so, okay, where does that feeling come from? The question of whether the conspiracy theory is accurately factually true or not is the least interesting thing about it. Like, what's the emotion behind that? What are the people expressing with this? And
We,
like all the people saying there's UFOs and aliens and that we're being lied to about this and that and all these conspiracy theories because all these things line up and it doesn't make sense unless they line up and because of someone manipulating it. Okay, spooky action at a distance. The two sticks, and you can only see the sticks, not the wave, but they all fall over at the same time. It's like, what if there's another causative factor here that's not a person manipulating things, but beyond physical? Go back in Christian terms a few hundred years, and yes, that is the will of God. Go off in various spiritual circles, like, well, astrology, that's a thing that would affect the whole planet if you accept the hypothesis of its truth. What other things? Shifts in collective consciousness. If you go from Carl Jung's philosophies, like there's various outside influences from here. It's like aliens, okay, extra dimensional beings, because they don't seem to follow the laws of physics as we understand them. So who says they're actually in our physical universe in the way we understand it? And okay, what are some things people have encountered that didn't come from the same physical universe? Well, they used to be called spirits and fae and so on. It's like these are things that are experienced. If you take a step back and say, okay, what do people experience, and then describe those experiences, it rearranges a whole lot of how you think. And then it's like religion. It's like, what's the point in religion? Oh, it's social control from the religious people trying to control the masses. And okay, well, that's one hypothetical explanation. Let's keep that hypothesis here. And then, okay, but people experience things. They have experiences that don't fit with purely physical explanations, and they meet ghosts of dead relatives, and that's a surprisingly common thing even today. But no one talks about it because they don't want people to think they're nuts. And it's like, okay, well, maybe religion emerged out of, oh, I feel this voice in my head that tells me a useful thing, like, don't go there, you'll die. And then my friend went there and he died. So, okay, maybe I should listen to the voice. And then you could talk to the voice and it introduces itself more and you get to know it. And then, let's do a religion. And then there's this voice and that voice and the other voice. And, let's have many gods. And then you have polytheism. And it's all confusing and everyone sees it differently. But there's stuff there. It's non-zero. That's something that can be pretty solidly said, even if it's all existing in our heads, like subconscious things. Right? It's like to deny the existence of the subconscious. Like, admittedly, it's a relatively new concept come up with by Freud back in the day, but there's stuff in there that's not under your control. Stop ignoring it and pretending you can control your mind like a computer, because it don't work. It fights back, and if you suppress an emotional impulse, it comes up somewhere else where you're not expecting it, like a geyser, and life's complicated and far more interesting than most people give it credit for. Sorry, rant over.
I was trying to keep up with it.
Sorry.
You need to do this more often. Get it off your chest so it's not all bottled.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to do a monologue or something. I mean, one of the earlier questions you started with is right on the money, though. It's like, why do people not trust the established narratives? Why are people so skeptical of everything that we're told, to the point of insanity in some cases, and then in others to, actually exploring good questions, like a lot of the stuff you brought up. And it's clear, it's like, because we've been lied to. Like, people know. People can sense that shit. It's like we've been duped for a long time by established narratives. And people are telling us lies on purpose. Whether that's just to, secure their own position or to do something malevolent, that's sort of beside the point. And I think it's great now that we actually have, an ability to investigate all of these questions, and the distrust of the establishment is nothing but building, which is great. We need that. There's been far too much trust in established order and systems.
Yeah, it's weird. Most people aren't aware of the fact that experts weren't really respected in the way they are now pre-World War II. They were like, think of the mad scientist. It's like sometimes he comes up with an interesting thing, but keep an eye on him because he'll come up with a crazy thing too, and not know the difference. And he's got this.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I think the idea of experts themselves is kind of stupid, because you're positing that a single individual can hold a correct map of anything completely in his mind, and that we must all adhere to his map, because our own logical map could not therefore compete.
As opposed to someone who's, I'm not sure what the term would be, master of his craft, where he hasn't proven he's got a correct map as such. He's proven he has a map that works, which is
it's practical, something that works in the real world. It's more just an appeal to credentialism. This person comes from this elite institution and therefore you must listen. Or, the elite institutions of media hold up this person and therefore you must listen. Like, there's a real power element behind it. And people aren't that easily duped. Like, they got a sense for things and go, no, I think that's bullshit. And even before we had access to technology that we could investigate and find alternative things and see that they're being, liars. Back in the day, people didn't buy that shit either, They didn't know what actually was going on, but they certainly didn't buy the established narrative. You know, even in the 50s and that, people were looking at the TV like, no. But the other beautiful thing about this, that distrust has opened curiosity to knowing what's going on. And we have the tools to investigate everything now. And there's enough distributed interest in that there's actual real resources going towards discovering different things. Like Graham Hancock is actually able to do his work and look into all of these different things because there's enough interest in the question. And there's enough interest in the questions because people distrust the established narrative.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful cycle. It's like it all comes back to it. People lied. People figured it out or intuitively felt that they were lying because we have a real sense for that. For self-preservation for obvious reasons. And that because of that, they stopped paying attention to that thing and started paying attention to others, and that shifted the attention resource and the monetary resource away from the establishment into the underground scene. Now to the point where they may be the establishment media or the establishment scientists, but they're not respected.
Graham Hancock's
like people
a really
aren't.
Interesting example of it.
Yeah, like more people listen to him.
So much effort goes into smearing him.
Yeah, like the entire field of archaeology is smaller and has less interest in it than him.
In the public view, yeah, that's weird.
It's not just public view; it's dollars. It's everything. It's like the free market has voted them out of their field and replaced by a single guy who's not even an archaeologist. He's just a journalist asking interesting questions.
Yeah.
And it's like, yep, done.
It's like what employees.
And the same with Rogan. Yeah. It's not just Rogan. It's like I think there's something like 1,000 news shows that is run by just a couple of people on YouTube, and every single one of them has more viewers than CNN and MSNBC and all of these networks combined.
That's a big thing. That's a big stat.
Yeah, it is. They're not. They are the establishment ones, but their legacy, it's already over. No one's watching anymore. And they're ranting in the corner, and we're all sort of looking at them like they're still the big powerful things. But they're just the PR department for the government. And that's why we still look at them, because they're tied in that way. But apart from that, they do not have the viewership or influence that people think they do. It's already over. They've already lost.
They were complaining, like, what was it? CNN have rooms full of people investigating things and working out their news stories, and this guy was complaining about this on CNN, and it's like, and he's just a guy sitting in a room. That Joe Rogan. It's like, how can he compete with this? It's like, well, firstly, you try doing that. It is not that easy, because every word you say will be picked apart by 1,000 people on the internet. But also, like, okay, stop saying that reality shouldn't be the way it is and start thinking about what you're doing wrong. Because
yes,
that's happening a lot, and that just traps people in where they are. Saying, I shouldn't have crashed. Well, you did.
Yeah, you don't
deal with it.
You don't curse you don't shake your fist at the sky and go, how is the world designed that I would be screwed over in this way? You go, fuck, what did I do? What have we done? It's like, okay, maybe, here's just a question, maybe the fact that your company cost millions of dollars a year to run, you have thousands of people working on your staff across multiple business buildings in multiple cities, and that you are routinely outdone by not just one person like Rogan with an assistant, but small news team organizations which are literally just two people, and they do better reporting than you, are more accurate, more honest, and have more engagement. Maybe you would think that actually you're doing something wrong. You know, it's like, how is this person doing better than us? It's like, maybe it's because you're doing shit. Like, you think about, your bullshit stories for the last 4 years, you know, what happened to the Russia collusion stuff? You know, that's maybe people just don't trust you anymore.
Yeah.
And they're going to sit there and go, yes, we are, you know, how can it possibly be the case that a random person who just speaks truth is out competing us? It's not like we've lied in every single news story for the better part of a decade and everyone knows it.
Mm.
Like, if you were being honest, if they were being honest, they know full well that they're scripted.
Mm.
They're not news. They don't tell the truth. And that's not just the American shit, it's all of it, including ours.
Mm.
Gotta love the government funded media. How could you have the arrogance to assume that you could lie to the world every time you speak for a decade and still be more successful than a single person telling the truth,
It's interesting.
regardless of how much money you have behind you?
Joe Rogan's not speaking his truth. He's made a platform
No.
for others to speak theirs.
Well, and often people don't. Like, people come on the show and lie, but he's not lying.
Mm.
He asks interesting questions. He's being curious, and he's not there to give a message.
Mm.
He's just asking questions. And it's not just that, it's just like Crystal and Saga is a great example, and Breaking Points. They're
Mm.
massive now. And I don't actually watch them, but I've seen them on Rogan and I've heard about them a bit. They're a news show, and it's a conservative and a liberal person. And they just have a good conversation, and they're both honest and
And they
like not
sit in the same
deceptive.
room without shouting each other down.
Yeah, no, and they agree on like 95% of things, which is like their whole point
Mm.
and why they're so successful. It's like, oh, turns out that we actually get along and they have good perspectives on everything because they're able to look at it from both sides and they don't hate each other, and they have a good conversation and things work out. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, wow, look at that. A single news show that caters to everyone and is honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's bridging that divide where the people from either side end up in echo chambers where they keep hearing, oh, the other guys are evil. Oh, the other guys are evil. And so they end up angry at each other. Instead, it's like, oh, I think this. Well, I think this. I think that's a bad idea. Why? It's like, da, 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 da. Oh,
Well,
okay. Well, no, I sort of agree with that bit. And I agree with that bit. But I don't agree with this bit. It's like, okay, two people, not ultimate evils
that's
fighting.
yeah,
It's.
that's why I'm rather concerned about our country,
Mm.
to be honest, because we pay a lot of attention to the world news and what's going on the big scale because that's what our generation does.
Mm.
Like, we're raised on the internet, we're internet citizens, so we're world citizens effectively. And then we have our national election coming up this year, and it's really important. Like it's a big deal, and I,
Mm.
I think most New Zealanders don't really realize how big a deal this election's going to be. Hope it ends up going the right way, or we're royally fucked. But that's beside the point. The news sources for our country, as far as I'm aware, all of them get money from the government,
Mm.
directly funded. Yeah. And if you think about our news media over the course of, say, the lockdowns, can you think of a single one that made a single comment that was critical about the government for that 2 year period? TV news or stuff or the Herald or I don't even know the other ones. There's other ones, I think, online ones.
They gave. Hmm. They did show a level of the public argument of, oh, you need to go further, oh, you're going too far. There wasn't a voice in the public media space of the angriest 50%, you could say. It was all the ones who broadly agreed but think it should be a bit more one way or the other.
Yeah. Yeah, I seem to remember a lot of it was um either we're doing great or we need to do better.
Hmm.
There wasn't a concern. Like, one something that really blew my mind is that we watched those shows when those lockdowns happened. We watched daily the news, as everyone did. We got, all the information that they had to give. And then we went and watched, like Crowder was one of the things we were watching at the time to give a real opposite perspective. And I'm rather thankful we did because we never got the jabs for that reason. Um, and it wasn't until that second lockdown that we had. We all came back out for like a year and a half or something, and then there was it was a real short one. It was like 3 weeks or something.
Hmm.
That we second one. Um, we were in a different town at the time, so I just remember it by where we were. But during that time, we started watching them again, and we go, oh God, here we go. And they had the story, and they showed this one guy protesting and getting arrested for it from back in the day, from the first one.
Hmm.
And there was like this 5 minute section, and it sort of blew us away because they referenced a whole bunch of protests that
Hmm.
had happened and how dangerous. And up until that point, 2 years after the initial outbreak and 6 months of lockdowns or something like that, which what it felt like, that was the first time that any form of protest or disagreement against the lockdowns had been mentioned on national TV. It was like a year and a half to 2 years into this whole setup.
Hmm.
And they referenced protests having happened at the start and having and how dangerous it was and this kind of stuff. And they showed footage of it, of people being arrested and fighting against this stuff in Christchurch and in most major cities. We had no idea. From someone who had watched the news every single day during lockdown,
Hmm.
both of them, for it to be 2 years into it and for the first time having heard, hey, there's someone else in the country, a single other person in the whole country who disagreed with this.
Hmm.
And yes, it's dangerous. That's what the TV said. But up until that point, it just made us realize that they'd been so careful with this. Up until that point, there had been no reference to any person disagreeing with it.
Hmm.
No reference to anyone making a statement against it, no reference to anyone protesting against it. Nothing. The message was always, this is what we're doing. What we're doing is good. Everyone agrees.
Hmm.
Do it. And that just, I don't know, that just blew my mind. That moment of realizing, wow, this has been happening the whole time. And I remember going to Christchurch not long after that because I remember the footage and the guy was like spray painting and stuff. And you can see the spray paint on the strip by the Bridge of Remembrance there, where that guy protested and got arrested. It's still there.
Hmm.
At least it was. They might have cleaned it off now. But that, in my mind, it cannot be accidental that they just didn't mention for years that anyone disagreed. That's deliberate action to make anyone who did disagree feel isolated. And where, for our nation, where could you go to find any other perspective during that time or now?
Hmm.
But like, I don't know. I assume you pay more attention to our nation's politics or news in general, because I think, as strange as it might sound, you're a bit more normie than I am, which is
Oh.
kind of a statement because we're both way out there.
Yeah, I've been wrapped up with personal things at the moment and sort of, what was it, disaster porn of eating popcorn, watching the train spew chemicals all over the US.
So yeah, you're the same as me. We're just focusing on other countries.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just thinking about the way that was handled. Like, from the point of view that this is the thing we need to do, there is a strong moral argument for excluding the opposing views, but that goes on the assumption that that is the right thing to do. Devil's advocates, steel manning, and so on. Like, we've got to attack all
Rather
sides.
steel man. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's rather steel manning. I'll give you that.
but and remembering how, like, in ancient Rome, when they had a crisis, say a war or something, they would elect a dictator. Like, otherwise, it was ruled by the Senate or whatever it was. But when in a time of crisis, they'd elect a dictator because of the necessity for rapid action. And
Yeah, that's why the president as well as the Senate.
mm, was the president the
Same
one
idea.
made the dictator in times of crisis?
No, they didn't have a president in that time
Ah,
in Rome. Reason why America has a president is so he can act when the Congress isn't there.
ah,
That's
yeah,
the point.
yeah,
Or now he's just dictator in chief all year round.
yeah, yeah. They were shouting at Trump for making a few executive orders, and how long into like a few weeks into his presidency, Biden had signed more orders than Trump ever did, and that no one said a word about it. It's like,
It was
I'm
day
not.
one.
Oh,
It
that
was day
too.
one.
Yeah, I'm
He,
not
he signed
saying
a lot.
which is right or wrong, but this treatment is unequal. Obvious partisan bias, like on its
I
own,
don't.
that
Yeah,
surely holds.
I don't think it needs to be said
Mm,
that Trump was treated unequally.
mm,
I think that one's pretty well established by
yeah.
like everyone on the planet at this point.
Like if the train had gone off the rails when Trump was in charge, whose fault would it have been?
Oh, could you imagine? You know, after dealing with what, like 4.5, 5 years of the Trump Russia collusion, if there was actually this Russian invasion while Trump was president, how much they'd be blaming him for it.
Yep.
That'd be hilarious. You know, they started the whole campaign trying to smear him to get him out of the race about his Trump Russia collusion. And then imagine the Ukraine war pops off while he's in office. They're going to go, "You're a terrible." Actually, no, in reality, if he was aggressive against them, they would say he's the greatest president ever because he's fighting a war. Um,
Yeah, they love their wars.
I still feel like, yeah, I still feel like they'd make some kind of way to make it bad for him.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, well, where were we talking about? You were trying to steel man
Yeah,
the
and I am, by temperament or inclination, I think politeness is the personality dimension I'm talking about, but the tendency to go along with what people tell me to do, I'm more likely to,
agreeable.
yeah, I'm more agreeable than you by inclination, and I'm trying to comprehend that aspect of my personality so that it is not a subconscious thing, so that it is a recognized aspect that I can choose to follow or not. Hmm.
Where were you going with that steelman argument? So that we
There are
lost that a bit.
perspectives from the high level where there doesn't need to be malicious intent. There doesn't. Everyone who was making the decisions could have been believing they were acting in the best interests of the society for everyone's greater good. I think there are
Um,
definitely arguments for
I think
losing sight of
I think I would
consequence. Mm.
I think I would agree with some hard asterisks on that.
Mm.
I think you could make that case for the first couple weeks, maybe a month, but then after that, to have world leaders who could not do the research of your average person with a cell phone to continue to make decisions based on their assumptions without investigation.
But that's when they're surrounded by experts who are telling them this is what you need to do and this is what will happen if you don't. And so you
Right.
need to lock down. So they're surrounded by people telling them to do the thing.
At the same time, at the same time, that person running the nation could have pulled out their cell phone and within 5 minutes realized that all the experts around them were bullshit. 1 month, maybe two into the whole drama, we knew.
Mm.
It was very clear. And how many years did that go on for?
Yeah.
It was only the protests that stopped it
I
here.
think from a high agreeableness perspective, it is far less obvious.
I was rather steeped in the research at that time.
Mm.
Like I said, when it all kicked off, it's like we were watching shows like Crowder on the daily,
Mm.
and right at the start there, yeah, it was scary. There was a lot of like, okay, what's going on? But it was like 2 weeks later than that we could see very clearly from the data that something's not right here. And maybe 2 weeks to a month after that, we knew the story.
Yeah. I was keeping an eye on Chris Martinson with his website Peak Prosperity, and
Oh,
he has the scientific background to be able to speak authoritatively on enough of it. He can read a scientific paper and see the conclusions it makes and see where it has fallen down in its statistical analysis, and he can weigh various scientific papers against each other and see, oh, there's not enough evidence for you to state this thing that you are stating unequivocally. Oh, there is this lack of data in order to do this thing. We don't know if it's safe. And like Brett Weinstein and Heather Haying and so on, they're pointing out that fundamentally they were pointing out, we know this much. You are categorically stating this much. We do not have that intervening data. You cannot say something that is new has no side effects if it has not been
yes,
around for a decade for
safe,
those side effects to.
safe. Yeah,
Sorry, you cut out there because I was
that
talking.
was a, that was a that was a very very good show. That one, I think,
Mm,
safe was the word he used for that. He's a
yeah.
fascinating guy. I've been following him since his original appearance years ago. But yeah, it's like he's a great example because he mentioned in that show, I'm pretty sure it's like when it all first came out, he was returning from another country
Mm.
and he was like, oh, wow. And he sort of made a comment about it. And then within an hour, he had to retract his comment
But he
because he
did.
had read the official story was bull. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, okay. This is clearly not the case. And
Yeah.
it's funny because like 2 weeks, maybe a month in, people who were on the outside, whatever you call it, it's like we were calling all the stuff that's coming out of the news now. It's that, conspiracy theory, really spoiler alert kind of setup. Like they get it within the first couple months, and then it's 2 years later that people are like, oh, yeah, clearly was manufactured by human beings involving these individuals and this funding that we knew about from the start.
Mm.
Clearly wasn't what they were saying it is with the
Yeah.
vaccine and all of this, and how it's maybe not a good idea to go down that road
Yeah.
right now.
So I wouldn't be
Like we
surprised
knew
if that
this.
meat market in Wuhan was the place it spread from when it
Yeah,
was
but
carried
it
there
is
by someone from the lab as they went home and picked up dinner.
yeah, well, it's not arguable at this point, as
Mm.
far as I'm concerned. That shit was man-made, and we've known that for a while.
It has bits of HIV
Like,
in it.
I'm not going to go into the,
Yeah.
the details of why. Like, I'm not here to prove anything. I'm not a scientist, but
Mm.
I don't have to be to know this shit.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. And
Yeah.
and this is my point. It's like a world leader. Okay, yes, you have experts around you.
Mm.
You should maybe at least do a little bit of your own research,
Mm.
like just a smidge,
Yeah.
before you say, put in a policy that might destroy your country. Take 5 minutes of your own time on your own phone and go, maybe I'm wrong about this.
Mm. I think the.
What would be the consequences? What's
Mm.
the potential other side of this coin? Rather than I have 10 experts, they all tell me the same thing, and I'm not going to consider the other side. I'll take this action that could be terribly bad for my nation and just go, ah, it'll be fine.
Mm. I think that uh, the kindest thing that can be said is signing up to the groupthink and not thinking outside of what the rest of the group was already thinking about. It's like they had a lot of
That's
experts thinking and feeding into
that's
it
the
and feeding
kindest.
information.
That's the kindest interpretation.
Mm.
I don't buy that one. Like that's the average person. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Um, the leader of the nation, A, that's not the person who should be subscribing to groupthink. Like that's the
Yeah.
point of having. And secondly, in the case of our Prime Minister, for sure, and certainly other ones, there's a pretty good case to be made that they were doing what they were told by certain Germans.
Yes.
I love that topic.
That
Really,
particular
what you?
Germans.
Yeah, fascinating person.
Yeah.
Is it dinner time? Yeah, okay. I have to go and eat.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be fun? Oh well,
Oh, you go eat
interesting
yours, I'll go
place.
cook mine.
Yeah, interesting place to leave it. But yeah, that's an interesting one.
Yeah.
I have a lot more to say on that topic. That was a big deal for me.
I know, yeah. I'll get back.
There's-
I'll have a go after dinner of getting back to working at my skills of totally decentralized communication.
yeah, yeah, you've been doing some interesting stuff on that in the homebrew kind of front, which is cool.
Oh yeah, I've
One
got
note I
some
want
electrical
to
spaghetti
before,
I've been working on.
as a positive note before we run off,
Mm.
resistance and protest, peaceful resistance and protest works.
Yeah.
Just remember that. That's the reason we don't have that totalitarian system they tried to force on us. As much as the TV news will never tell you, people resisted that shit to the point where they had to backtrack all of it. Like the big protest that we organized, that made a big deal of difference, you know? And she resigned. And that's not because she felt so uncomfortable. It's like, no, that's because of the protests. Not only the ones that we did, but then the ones that the farmers are doing at the moment. She resigned because of political pressure, not because of, I want to go spend time with my baby or whatever the bullshit excuse was. That wee clip of her nearly crying on national TV of, I can't do this anymore. Ah, just Jim, save that shit forever.
I can't take
I,
pleasure in that sort of thing personally.
I can. A person who nearly destroyed all of our lives and tried to usher in a totalitarian system got forced out by her own party and nearly cried on national TV about it. That's great.
It's the last bit of that I
Good
have
thing.
the issue with. Just the end of that statement.
Uh, I do like it when people who attempt to do evil things get their just desserts. And all she had to do was step down. It's not like she's being imprisoned or
Yeah,
anything.
yeah,
It's not a real punishment. It's just, sorry, you don't get to enslave your population anymore. You can go home to being a mum with your millions of dollars. That's not a big problem.
yeah, yeah. That's
I don't feel a whole overwhelming amount of pity for that psychopath. Uh,
You're blunter than I.
there's some things I care a lot about, and that's one of them. And
Yeah.
I'm not gonna. Well, like my point the other day, I want to be able to say what I think here and be genuinely honest. I'm not going to stand and go make a political speech of like, oh, we need to respect each other and be civil and regardless of what they do. It's like, no, I'm happy when bad people get punished. And she may have thought she was doing the right thing and been forced to confront her mistakes and her errors and have realized the scale and severity of her transgressions and have come to a massive self-realization about it and be beating herself up about it a lot, which would be kind of beautiful and amazing. If she said that on the public stage, that would be massive credit, and I would have so much respect for her. But I don't buy it. I don't think that's what happened.
Yeah, it's
That's
more
my
likely
that
that it
would
was
be my
just the pressure.
hopeful, charitable perspective. But as far as I'm concerned, when you're that far gone, it's not happening.
You got to act according to people's actions, not according to what they say or what
Yeah.
they. Yeah.
Yeah. If she came out and made that statement, then yeah, I would have a lot of respect for her. And I think I would be very, very kind to her in my conversations with other people. But without that admission of guilt and wrongdoing, she can bear the brunt of the mistakes that she made. If you don't admit you were wrong to do the things you did, then you can damn well face the criticism for doing them.
Whatever you do, you need to face up to the consequences.
Yeah.
Everything. It's like,
Honestly. So I was wrong. I am sorry. This is what I did wrong. Here's why it was wrong. Please forgive me.
And the more you hide from
Like imagine
those
the
consequences,
leaders did that.
even if it's that you
Yeah,
believe you acted in the best interests, you will face the result of your actions, even if that result is a misguided mass coming down the street at you with police in the way. Even if you did act with the best of intentions, if the result of that is a mob, you face
yeah.
that.
Or just public judgment.
Mm,
Like like was it? I don't remember which Bush it is with the Iraq War.
both of them.
It's like 100,000 dead or something. And he's just hiding in a ranch in the back of America. But the whole world knows that he's responsible for that shit, and he will go down in history as a person who killed untold amounts of people.
Oh, he'll face the
Just
music in his next life.
maybe we yeah. I'm not so sure about the whole metaphysical question. I
It's
don't know. You talked
psychologically
about reincarnation.
reassuring.
It is. I'm sure it is.
Mm.
You talked about reincarnation earlier. Perhaps we can talk about that kind of thing next time. Hey, metaphysics, it's
Yeah,
still coming.
I'll have to look up the evidence for it because there are people who wrote books on the documented evidence.
Oh, please don't start preparing for the shows. I already feel woefully undereducated. I don't need you coming in with notes as
I
well.
feel that way too.
Oh, God. Oh, I think we'll leave it there.
Yep.
Good chat. Good seeing you, mate.
See ya.
Bye.